We are a body like Bruce, and we found this particular book in the public domain, public access, but the first copy that we found when we tried to read it was just so messed up we just couldn't read it. So we searched around and we found this version, which is much better. There's nothing wrong with its content, in the intention that we want to delve deep into the Bruce Lee information available to us and try to come to understand the actual mindset of Bruce Lee and how he succeeded, how he did all in his short lifetime to succeed in everything he said himself, and maybe emulate or duplicate that success in our particular chosen genre or field that we have come to realise that we are very talented in, natural in. It's what we're supposed to do. That's why we were created and put here on this planet. We found this book in the public domain, public access, so no copyright infringement was or is intentional, and we're bringing it to all via this video for educational purposes alone. So we want to have a look at this book, Bruce Lee, Artist of Life, edited by John Little. Contents page with a foreword by Linda Lee Caldwell, Bruce's widow, and contents page. The contents continues. Foreword. The path of an artist. There are not a great many truly outstanding people who pass through our lives. These few remarkable people leave a distinct imprint when their chosen path in life happens to cross ours. Indeed, an encounter with an extraordinary human being at a particular confluence in the course of our daily existence may define our destiny. And Linda Lee says here that she imagines that most of us can name only a handful of people who have exerted such a life-changing influence upon us. Perhaps your father or mother gave you such inspiration, a teacher or a friend, a writer or a figure from history. Undoubtedly, because you have picked up this book, you consider that Bruce Lee may be one of these, or those rare individuals who has profoundly impacted your life. It goes without saying that we believe this is Linda in the foreword. Her life was significantly different from what it would have been had she not met Bruce on that momentous day in 1963. She is grateful for the 9 years of marriage that she had the privilege of sharing with this rare and gifted individual. In addition to the adventure of living with a thoroughly energizing person and the joy of creating a family with him, she learned a great deal from Bruce, which has guided her through all the years since he left or he passed on. In thinking about the enormity of the work that Bruce accomplished in his short life, Linda is drawn to the idea that the energy of the soul is never extinguished with the passing of the physical body. Even as a young man, Bruce often described a mysterious power within him that motivated the paths he chose in his lifetime. Linda found it to be an exceptional trait that Bruce was able to recognize and value the mysterious gift that burned within him. He knew instinctively that his life had purpose, and even as he allowed the wisdom of the ages to speak through him, he simultaneously directed his self-will toward the attainment of his visions. Bruce often said that it was not what happens during one's life that makes the difference between people. It is the way one chooses to react to those circumstances that test the mettle of a life well lived. Tracing the dominant patterns of Bruce's life illustrates the crucial points of choice and perhaps the guidance of the mysterious power which directed his path. It was not an accident that Bruce began the study of Kung Fu under Master Yip Man, who instilled in him the greater meaning of martial art beyond the physical. It was not happenstance that prompted Bruce to study philosophy at the University of Washington, but the desire to infuse the spirit of philosophy into martial art. It was not by chance that in crafting his acting skills, Bruce refused the path of the image makers and instead worked to expose and express his true self. And always the choice of continuing self-education through voracious reading and prolific writing led Bruce down the path of expanding and broadening his potential. Bruce was a highly educated man because he never missed an opportunity to let a fact or a situation teach him more about himself. As a scholar, he was able to turn this intellectual leaning inward and make it a tool for self-cultivation. As a philosopher, he was able to appeal specific principles. He was able to apply specific principles of his art to the broader endeavour of living life as a real human being. A truly extraordinary characteristic of Bruce was that he had the ability to communicate his learning process at the same time he was internalizing or living it. Whether he was teaching, acting, writing or speaking, Bruce was able to reveal his own personal process of self-discovery. As he would have said in his martial art and through the medium of film, he was simply and honestly expressing himself. Superficially, this could be called charisma, but on a more profound level, this ability to bear the soul should be called artistry. Just as Michelangelo chipped away at a block of marble to reveal David, so did Bruce peel away the layers of his inner soul to expose his true self to the world. Do you know instinctively that this is a genuine human being when you see Bruce on the screen? Is it this peeling process that sets Bruce apart from other martial artists and actors? For those of us who knew him personally, the Bruce who was the actor is the same man we knew in real life. He was bigger than life in all ways, on and off the screen. Bruce's words contained within his volume speak so eloquently it is hardly necessary for Linda to expound upon his thoughts. She simply welcomes you to an opportunity to know Bruce better through sharing his insights, and perhaps then you will know yourself better too. The ultimate destination of Bruce's journey was peace of mind. The true meaning of life. Linda feels confident that because Bruce chose the path of self-knowledge over accumulation of facts and the path of self-expression over image enhancement, that he did reach his destiny with a peaceful mind. That fact gave Linda a peace of mind. Or gave her peace of mind. Bruce said, "To know yourself takes a lifetime. He did not waste a moment." Linda Lee Caldwell. Odyssey of an Old Soul by Linda Lee Caldwell. The old soul wandered the length and breadth of the spiritual universe. The soul was wise, for it had lived in the minds of the great thinkers of the world. The soul was deep, for its wealth of human experience could fill a bottomless lake. The soul had great power, born of knowing itself through countless lives of introspection. In the realm of no time, there are many new souls. They leave often to live in the human world, but the old soul lingered in the ethereal nothingness, awaiting the call of a special corporeal host. It happened that the heart and mind of a young boy cried out for the attention of the old soul. The immortal guest would once again grace mankind with his wisdom and compassion. For a mere 32 earthly years, the soul burned with a passionate, mysterious power. Energized in the young man's search for truth, liberating an unparalleled creative and spiritual force, the twin captains of knowledge and wisdom were well served by the old soul's mortal tenure, for the soul of an artist dwelt among us for an imperceptible moment in the span of time. Never in vain, for in the wake of this old soul's odyssey, a legacy of insights was recorded to enrich the heart and mind, and perhaps the aged soul of one who dares to gaze into the mirror of real life. Introduction. An artist of life. Approximately 6 months before his death, Bruce Lee wrote a profoundly personal essay, In My Own Process, which set out his insights on the process of life. Writing from his heart, Lee jotted down his deepest feelings before they could be passed through the filter of his ego. Over several weeks, he returned to his essay in between filming Into the Dragon and drafting additional ideas for The Game of Death. He added more jottings as the insights came to him. At his office in Golden Harvest Studios, Hong Kong, in his study in Kowloon Tong, or when he went out to eat. All told, he wrote 8 versions of the essay, each containing slightly more of his experiences as a martial artist, as an actor, and most importantly as a human being. In the final draft of this essay, which presumably was written solely for Lee's own edification, as it was never published, Lee penned a rather telling statement. Basically, I have always been a martial artist by choice and actor by profession, but above all, I am hoping to actualize myself to be an artist of life along the way. Artist of life refers to the process of being an individual who, through the use of his own independent judgment, sought to fully actualize himself as a total human being. Example: physically, mentally, spiritually. Moreover, the artist of life is willing to bare his soul for the purpose of honest communication and not get caught up in societal role-playing, self-image creation. As Lee once told journalist Pierre Berton, it is easy for me to put on a show and be cocky and then feel pretty cool. Or I can do all kinds of funny things and be blinded by it. Or I can show you some really fancy movement. But to express oneself honestly, not lying to oneself, that, my friend, is very hard to do. Lee sought to infuse this perspective into everything, dealing with friends, family members and business associates, creating, choreographing, directing and starring in films, and writing philosophical treatises, psychology papers, poetic musings and personal essays. He told interviewer Ted Thomas, "My life seems to me to be a life of self-examination, a peeling of myself bit by bit, day by day." This is most evident in Lee's writing. No matter what the topic, from Chinese martial culture to heartfelt poetry, here was a real man who was laying bare his soul. Although he attended the University of Washington, the bulk of Lee's education was gained informally from his voracious reading. As he lived before the age of home computers and photocopiers, Lee wrote notes, often verbatim transcriptions in longhand, from passages he found both true and helpful. Reviewing them would inspire him to further writing. They were his private journals, where Lee contemplated the thoughts of men and women of like mind. Many of his entries, the excerpts from Eric Hoffer's The Passionate State of Mind and Frederick S. Pearl's books on Gestalt therapy, for example, have been included to share some of Lee's influences and attitudes and worldviews he found congenial. Ideas encountered in his reading often surfaced in his private moments. For example, in his essays on acting, he explores Pearl's tenets regarding self-actualization versus self-image actualization. Finding a truth in one discipline and then applying that truth to an entirely unrelated discipline is a hallmark of Lee's genius. He saw the connection where others did not. Lee read Krishnamurti and Alan Watts on spirituality and saw a direct application to a divergent activity, martial arts. He also examined Pearl's work in psychology and saw an application not for the treatment of neuroses and depression but for truer and more dynamic acting. Even though these were Lee's private papers, never intended for publication, they are important documents that allow us to see the evolution of Lee's beliefs and art in context. In addition to his journal entries, the volume also includes Lee's personal essays, poems and philosophic writings on a wide range of subjects. It is therefore ironic that for over a quarter of a century, Lee has been recognized primarily for his physical skills and tactical principles in the art of unarmed combat. But as Bruce Lee, artist of life, reveals, such a shallow perspective is completely inaccurate. Lee was equal parts poet, philosopher, scientist, actor, producer, director, author, choreographer, martial artist, husband, father and friend. He sought out life in all of its wondrous aspects and was enthralled by the process of what he was experiencing. Always a thinker, Lee was fascinated by the insights into spiritual truths that could be garnered through adjusting the focus of human awareness. This is not to suggest that in reading Artist of Life you need to first empty your cup entirely of the notion of Bruce Lee, the martial artist, but you do not need to prepare room to meet the complete Bruce Lee, the Artist of Life. In the future, all who wish to represent themselves as torchbearers of Lee's art and philosophy will need to know all aspects of the man. They will as much need to know, understand, and most importantly, feel the meaning underlying Lee's various drafts of the essay in My Own Process, along with the deeper message inherent in the 8 drafts of Toward Personal Liberation, Chi Kung Do. For example, as they are now able to physically recite his combative techniques and repeat his martial maxims. A great artist communicates through art. Looking at a painting, one can instantly know what the artist was feeling and thinking when he painted it. Time has no place here, as the emotion is as clear and distinct as if you were the artist yourself. Similarly, in looking at the broad and colourful strokes that Lee painted across life's canvas, we are able to intuit his personality, his passion, his heartfelt convictions, his very soul. If, as Lee once said of art, it is the music of the soul made visible, then surely this book is his symphony. If you read Artist of Life with what Lee liked to call quiet, choiceless awareness, you will find that you are not so much reading a book as you are visiting with an old friend. And while Bruce Lee may no longer be with us physically, he is still able to communicate with us via the printed page in a manner that transcends the limits of human morality. While appreciating his company, we should also note his counsel: become artists of life ourselves. We would be doing our friend and ourselves the gravest of disservices if we simply put him on a pedestal and adopted his words and beliefs as our own. In his letter, included in part 8 of this book, to John, Lee states as much. You see, John, that your way of thinking is definitely not the same as mine. Art, after all, is a means of acquiring personal liberty. Your way is not my way, nor mine yours. So whether or not we can get together, remember, well, that art lives where absolute freedom is. There is considerable danger in standing too close to the river of another's thoughts. The faster the current, the easier it is to fall in and be swept away from ourselves. Instead, let us simply enjoy watching Bruce Lee's thought as it courses through these pages, noting where it bends and turns and where it rages, froths and bubbles with greatest energy. If we pull back and look at these thoughts from our own vantage, from where we each stand upon life's banks, we can see the bigger picture, what Lee's finger is pointing at. And it is at this point where the river of one man's thoughts meets the sea of human understanding that we will finally be able to see all that heavenly glory that Lee first told us about over a quarter of a century ago. And we can directly experience the awe of being fully conscious, fully human, fully alive, and fully ourselves. For as Lee wisely observed, it is only in the process of coming to know ourselves that we can come to know anything. John Little. I cannot teach you, only help you to explore yourself, nothing more. Bruce Lee. Kung Fu. When Bruce Lee returned to the land of his birth, America, from Hong Kong at the age of 18, he brought with him a vision of introducing the then little-known cultural art of Chinese Kung Fu to America. Lee had at one time actually envisioned establishing chains of Kung Fu institutes all across America, like McDonald's, he once said. However, as his knowledge expanded with age and with his philosophic and martial experiences, he no longer felt the need to extol the virtues of tradition, however venerated. This is not to suggest that Lee ever abandoned his Chinese heritage and philosophy. He simply over time came to look for the common root of humanity as opposed to nationality to justify his belief system and actions. Even so, it is interesting to note that when he began to take control over the philosophy content of his films in 1972, the lessons he revealed were gleaned from the Eastern traditions. These essays, dealing extensively with Chinese philosophy and martial art, were written in the early 1960s. They are a wonderful reflection of a young Bruce Lee's driving passion to introduce and share with Westerners the beauty of his Chinese culture. The Tao of Kung Fu, a study in the way of the Chinese martial art. Kung Fu is a special kind of skill, a fine art rather than just a physical exercise or self-defense. To the Chinese, Kung Fu is the subtle art of matching the essence of the mind to that of the techniques in which it has to work. The principle of Kung Fu is not a thing that can be learned like a science by fact-finding or instruction in facts. It has to grow spontaneously, like a flower, in a mind free from desires and emotions. The core of this principle of Kung Fu is Tao, the spontaneity of the universe. The word Tao has no exact equivalent in the English language. To render it into the way or the principle or the law is to give it too narrow an interpretation. Lao Tzu, the founder of Taoism, described Tao in the following words. The way that can be expressed in words is not the external way. The name that can be uttered is not the eternal name. Conceived of as nameless, it is the cause of heaven and earth. Conceived of as having a name, it is the mother of all things. Only the man, eternally free from passion, can contemplate its spiritual essence. He who is clogged by desires can see no more than its outer form. These two things, the spiritual yin and the material yang, though we call them by different names, are one and the same in their origin. The sameness is a mystery of the mysteries. It is the gate of all that is subtle and wonderful. In Masterpieces of World Philosophy, Tao is the nameless beginning of things, the universal principle underlying everything, the supreme ultimate pattern, and the principle of growth. Houston Smith, the author of The World's Religions, explained Tao as the way of ultimate reality, the way of principle, the way or principle behind all life, or the way man should order his life to gear in with the way the universe operates. Source: handwritten essay by Bruce Lee entitled The Tao of Kung Fu, a study in the way of the Chinese martial art, dated May 16, 1962. Bruce Lee Papers. Although no one word can substitute its meaning, I have used the word truth for it, the truth behind Kung Fu, the truth that every Kung Fu practitioner should follow. Tao operates in yin and yang, a pair of mutually complementary forces that are at work in and behind all phenomena. The principle of yin yang, also known as Tai Chi, is the basic structure of Kung Fu. The Tai Chi, or Grand Terminus, was first drawn more than 3,000 years ago by Chao Chun-yi. The yang, whiteness, principle represents positiveness, firmness, masculinity, substantiality, brightness, day heat, and so forth. The yin, blackness, principle is the opposite. It represents negativeness, softness, femininity, insubstantiality, darkness, night, coldness, and so forth. The basic theory in Tai Chi is that nothing is so permanent as never to change. In other words, when activity, yang, reaches the extreme point, it becomes inactivity, and inactivity forms yin. Extreme inactivity returns to become activity, which is yang. Activity is the cause of inactivity and vice versa. This system of complementary increasing and decreasing of the principle is continuous. From this one can see the two forces, yin-yang, although they appear to conflict, in reality are mutually interdependent. Instead of opposition, there is cooperation and alternation. The application of the principles of yin-yang in Kung Fu are expressed as the law of harmony. It states that one should be in harmony with, not in rebellion against, the strength and force of the opposition. This means that one should do nothing that is not natural or spontaneous. The important thing is not to strain in any way. When opponent A uses strength, yang on B, B must not resist him back with strength. In other words, B does not use positiveness, yang, against positiveness, yang, but instead yields to A with softness, yin, and leads A in the direction of his own force, negativeness, yin, to positiveness, yang. When A strength goes to the extreme, the positiveness yang will change to negativeness yin, and B can then take him as unguarded moment and attack with force yang. Thus, the whole process is not unnatural or strained. B fits his movement harmoniously and continuously into that of A without resisting or striving. The above idea gives rise to a closely related law, the law of non-interference with nature, which teaches a Kung Fu man to forget about himself and follow his opponent's strength instead of himself. He does not move ahead but responds to the fitting influence. The basic idea is to defeat the opponent by yielding to him and using his own strength. That is why a Kung Fu man never asserts himself against his opponent and never puts himself in frontal opposition to the direction of his opponent's force. When being attacked, he will not resist but will control the attack by swinging with it. This law illustrates the principles of non-resistance and non-violence, which were found on the idea that the branches of a fir tree snap under the weight of the snow, while the simple reeds, weaker but more supple, can overcome it. In the I Ching, Confucius illustrated this. To stand in the stream is a datum of nature. One must follow and flow with it. In the Tao Te Ching, Gospel of Taoism, Lao Tzu pointed out to us the value of gentleness. Contrary to common belief, the yin principle is softness and pliableness is to be associated with life and survival. Because he can yield, a man can survive. In contrast, the yang principle, which is assumed to be rigorous and hard, makes a man break under pressure. Note the last two lines, which make a fair description of revolution, as many generations of people have seen it. Alive, a man is supple, soft, in death unbending, rigorous. All the creatures, grass and trees alive, are plastic but are pliant too, and dead are friable and dry. Unbending rigour is the mate of death, and yielding softness company of life. Unbending soldiers get no victories. The stiffest tree is readiest for the axe. The strong and mighty topple from their place. The soft and yielding rise above them all. This way of movement in Kung Fu is closely related to the movement of the mind. In fact, the mind is trained to direct the movement of the body. The mind wills and the body behaves. As the mind is to direct the body movements, the way to control the mind is important, but it is not an easy task. In his book, Glenn Clark mentions some of the emotional disturbances in athletics. Every conflicting centre, every extraneous, disrupting, decentralising emotion jars the natural rhythm and reduces a man's efficiency on the gridiron far more seriously than physical jars and bodily conflicts can ever jar him. The emotions that destroy the inner rhythm of a man are hatred, jealousy, lust, envy, pride, vanity, covetousness and fear. To perform the right technique in Kung Fu, physical loosening must be continued in a mental and spiritual loosening, so as to make the mind not only agile but free. In order to accomplish this, the Kung Fu man has to remain quiet and calm and to master the principle of no-mindedness. Wu Shu Sin. No-mindedness is not a blank mind that excludes all emotions, nor is it simply calmness and quietness of mind. Although quietude and calmness are important, it is the non-graspiness of the mind that mainly constitutes the principle of no-mindedness. A Kung Fu man employs his mind as a mirror. It grasps nothing and it refuses nothing. It receives but does not keep. As Alan Watts puts it, the no-mindedness is a state of wholeness in which the mind functions freely and easily without the sensation of a second mind or ego standing over it with a club. What he means is let the mind think what it likes without interference by the separate thinker or ego within oneself. So long as it thinks what it wants, there is absolutely no effort in letting it go, and the disappearance of the effort to let go is precisely the disappearance of the separate thinker. There is nothing to try to do, for whatever comes up moment by moment is accepted, including non-acceptance. No-mindedness is then not being without emotion or feeling, but being one in whom feeling is not sticky or blocked. It is a mind immune to emotional influences. Like this river, everything is flowing on ceaselessly without cessation or standstill. No mindedness is employing the whole mind as we use the eyes when we rest them upon various objects, but make no special effort to take anything in. Chuang Shu, Shang Zi, the disciple of Lao Tzu, stated, "The baby looks at things all day without winking. That's because his eyes are not focused on any particular object. He goes without knowing where he is going, and stops without knowing what he is doing. He merges himself with the surroundings and moves along with it. These are the principles of mental hygiene." Therefore, concentration in Kung Fu does not have the usual sense of restricting the attention to a single sense object. It is simply a quiet awareness of whatever happens to be here and now. Such concentration can be illustrated by an audience at a football game. Instead of a concentrated attention on the player who has the ball, they have an awareness of the whole football field. In a similar way, a Kung Fu man's mind is concentrated by not dwelling on any particular part of the opponent. This is especially true when he deals with many opponents. For instance, suppose 10 men are attacking him, each in succession, ready to strike him down. As soon as one is disposed of, he will move on to another one without permitting the mind to stop with any. However rapidly one blow may follow another, he leaves no time to intervene between the two. Every one of the 10 will thus be successfully and every one of the 10 will successively be dealt with. This is possible only when the mind moves from one object to another without being stopped or arrested by anything. If the mind is unable to move on in this fashion, it is sure to lose the combat somewhere between two encounters. The mind is present everywhere because it is nowhere attached to any particular object, and it can remain present because even when relating to this or that object, it does not change, it does not cling to it. The flow of thought is like water filling a pond, which is always ready to flow off again. It can work its inexhaustible power because it is free, and it can be open to everything because it is empty. This can be compared with what Chang Chen-chi called serene reflection. He wrote, "Serene means tranquility of no thought, and the reflection means vivid and clear awareness. Therefore, serene reflection is clear awareness of no thought." As stated earlier, a Kung Fu man aims at harmony with himself and his opponent. Also, being in harmony with one's opponent is possible not through force, which provokes conflict and reactions, but through a yielding to the opponent's force. In other words, a Kung Fu man promotes the spontaneous development of his opponent and does not venture to interfere by his own action. He loses himself by giving up all subjective feelings and individuality, and he becomes one with his opponent. Inside his mind, oppositions have become mutually cooperative instead of mutually exclusive. When his private egos and conscious efforts yield to a power not his own, then he then achieves the supreme action, non-action, Wu Wei. Wu means not or non, and Wei means action, doing, striving, straining, or busyness. Wu Wei doesn't really mean doing nothing but letting one's mind alone, trusting it to work by itself. Wu Wei in Kung Fu means spontaneous action or spirit action in the sense that the governing force is the mind and not the senses. During sparring, a Kung Fu man learns to forget about himself and follow the movements of his opponent, leaving his mind free to make its own counter movement without any interfering deliberation. He frees himself from all mental suggestions of resistance and adopts a supple attitude. His actions are all performed without self-assertion. He lets his mind remain spontaneous and ungrasped. As soon as he stops to think, his flow of movement will be disturbed and his opponent will immediately strike him. Every action therefore has to be done unintentionally without ever trying. Through Wu Wei, a reposeful ease is secured. This passive achievement as Chuang Shi pointed out, will free a Kung Fu man from striving and straining himself. A yielding will has a reposeful ease, soft as downy feathers. A quietude, a shrinking from action, an appearance of inability to do. Placidly free from anxiety, one acts. With the opportune time, one moves and revolves in the line of creation. One does not move ahead but responds to the fitting influences. Establish nothing in regard to oneself. Let things be what they are. Move like water, rest like a mirror. Respond like an echo, pass quickly like the non-existent, and be quiet as purity. Those who gain lose. Do not precede others, always follow them. The natural phenomenon which the Kung Fu man sees as being the closest resemblance to Wu Wei is water. Nothing is weaker than water, but when it attacks something hard or resistant, then nothing withstands it, and nothing will alter its way. The above passage from the Tao Te Ching illustrates to us the nature of water. Water is so fine that it is impossible to grasp a handful of it. Strike it, yet it does not suffer hurt. Stab it, and it is not wounded. Sever it, yet it is not divided. It has no shape of its own, but moulds itself to the receptacle that contains it. When heated to the state of steam, it is invisible, but has enough power to split the earth itself. When frozen, it crystallizes into a mighty rock. First it is turbulent, like Niagara Falls, and then calm like a still pond, fearful like a torrent, and refreshing like a spring on a hot summer's day. So is the principle of Wu Wei. The rivers and seas are lords of 100 valleys. This is because their strength is in loneliness. They are kings of them all. So it is that the perfect master, wishing to lead them, he follows. Thus, though he is above them, he follows. Thus, though he is above them, men do not feel him to be an injury. And since he will not strive, none strive with him. The world is full of people who are determined to be somebody or to give trouble. They want to get ahead, to stand out. Such ambition has no use for a Kung Fu man who rejects all forms of self-assertiveness and competition. On who tries to stand on tiptoe cannot stand still. One who tries to stand on tiptoe cannot stand still. One who stretches his legs too far cannot walk. One who advertises himself too much is ignored. One who is too insistent on his own view finds few to agree with him. One who claims too much credit does not get even what he deserves. One who is too proud is soon humiliated. These are condemned as extremes of greediness and self-destructive activity. Therefore, one who acts naturally avoids such extremes. Those who know do not speak. Those who speak do not know. Stop your sense. Let sharp things be blunted, tangles resolved, delight tempered, and turmoil subdued. For this is mystic unity, in which the wise man is moved, neither by affection nor yet by estrangement, or profit, or loss, or honour, or shame. Accordingly, by all the world he is held highest. A Kung Fu man, if he is really good, is not proud at all. Pride, according to Mr. Eric Hoffer, is a sense of worth that derives from something that is not organically part of oneself. Pride emphasizes the importance of the superiority of a person's status in the eyes of others. There is fear and insecurity in pride, because when a person aims at being highly esteemed and achieves each status, he is automatically involved in the fear of losing his status. Then protection of his status appears to be his most important need, and this creates anxiety. Mr. Hoffer further states that the less promise and potency in the self, the more imperative is the need for pride. One is proud when he identifies himself with an imaginary self. The core of pride is self-rejection. As we know, Kung Fu is aiming at self-cultivation, and the inner self is one's true self. So in order to realize his true self, a Kung Fu man lives without being dependent upon the opinion of others. Since he is completely self-sufficient, he can have no fear of not being esteemed. A Kung Fu man devotes himself to being self-sufficient and never depends upon the external rating by others for his happiness. A Kung Fu master, unlike the beginner, holds himself in reserve, is quiet and unassuming without the least desire to show off. Under the influence of Kung Fu training, his proficiency becomes spiritual, and he himself, grown ever free through spiritual struggle, is transformed. To him, fame and status mean nothing. Thus, Wu Wei is the art of artlessness, the principle of no principle, to state it in terms of Kung Fu. The genuine beginner knows nothing about the way of blocking and striking, and much less about his concern for himself. When an opponent tries to strike him, he instinctively parries it. This is all he can do. But as soon as his training starts, he is taught how to defend and attack, where to keep the mind, and many other technical tricks which makes his mind stop at various junctures. For this reason, whenever he tries to strike the opponent, he feels unusually hampered. He has lost altogether the original sense of innocence and freedom. But as months and years go by, as his training acquires fuller maturity, his bodily attitude and his way of managing the technique towards no-mindedness come to resemble the state of mind he had at the very beginning of training, when he knew nothing, when he was altogether ignorant of the art. The beginning and the end thus turn into next-door neighbours. In the musical scale, one may start with the lower pitch and gradually ascend to the highest. When the highest is reached, one finds it is located next to the lowest. In a similar way, when the higher stage is reached in the study of Taoist teaching, a Kung Fu man turns into a kind of simpleton who knows nothing of Tao, nothing of his teachings, and is devoid of all learning. Intellectual calculations are lost sight of, and a state of no-mindedness prevails. When the ultimate perfection is attained, the body and limbs perform by themselves what is assigned to them to do, with no interference from the mind. The technical skill is so automatic it is completely divorced from conscious efforts. There are big differences between the Chinese hygiene and the Western hygiene. Some of the obvious ones are: Chinese exercise is rhythmic, whereas the Western is dynamic and full of tension. The Chinese exercises seek to merge harmoniously with nature, whereas the Western dominates it. The Chinese exercise is both a way of life and a mental cultivation, while the Western exercise is merely a sport or a physical calisthenic. Perhaps the main difference is the fact that Chinese hygiene is yin, softness, while Western is yang, positiveness. We can compare the Western mind with an oak tree that stands firm and rigid against a strong wind. When the wind becomes stronger, the oak tree cracks. The Chinese mind, on the other hand, is like the bamboo that bends with the strong wind. When the wind ceases, that is, when it goes back to the extreme and changes, the bamboo springs back stronger than before. Western hygiene is a gratuitous waste of energy. The over-exertion and overdevelopment of bodily organs involved in Western athletics is detrimental to one's health. Chinese hygiene, on the other hand, throws its emphasis on conservation of energy. The principle is always that of moderation without going to the extreme. Whatever exercise there may be consists of harmonious movements calculated to normal lies, but not to excite one's bodily regimen. It starts out with a mental regimen as a basis, in which the sole object is to bring about peace and calmness of mind. With this as a basis, it aims at stimulating the normal functioning of the internal process of respiration and blood circulation.